Here at home, apart from legalizing the buying and the selling of adult sex, the decriminalisation of sex work also signifies a meeting of the minds between the Health and Justice Departments. With me to discuss this, I have Deputy Justice Minister John Jeffery and Health Advocate Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, who so many of us have come to know as Dr. T. Dr. T is also the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to health. To both of you, thanks very much for making the time to be here today. Dr. T, you've travelled a long road on behalf of sex workers. What does this mean to you and them?
This is such an important milestone for South Africa, and I think it signifies the extent to which the government has listened to the voices of sex workers who are at the forefront of many of the human rights violations that they experience. And, my own coming into this sector of sex work and sex workers' human rights, was as a medical student having to assist women who have faced particular violence, who have particular needs around their health, who are sex workers, but who couldn't freely get those services because of criminalization.
Deputy Minister, public comment has now closed for the amendments, the proposed changes. What happens now?
What has to happen now is those public comments have to be considered, evaluated and considered by the department. And then we'll see whether we think that any changes should be made to the bill. Whatever is done, then we'll have to go back to Cabinet for a decision as to, or what we'll be asking for is permission to introduce it into Parliament. Then it will go to Parliament, first to the National Assembly. They will have to follow a public participation process, a much more rigorous one, in fact, even have public hearings when they consider on the bill. And then if passed by the National Assembly, it'll go to the National Council of Provinces. So it's still some way to go, but we hope to have it completed before the end of the term.
Dr. T, we've heard in the insert that we've played earlier that if we decrim sex work, it could have quite a dramatic impact on gender-based violence. But what about the health of sex workers? You've alluded to it a little bit. What would the impact be on HIV infection rates, for instance?
The issue of sex work actually is a human rights issue simply because of the key principles involved. Privacy, for example, dignity, bodily integrity, autonomy, and the decision to be able to have your own health in your hands and have a healthcare system that is responsive and supportive of those decisions. And with criminalization, it limits to the extent to which sex workers can actually firstly go to a facility, but even when they're at the facility, it impacts the quality of consultation they're able to have, because a lot of the questions that will be asked, for example, how many sexual partners do you have? They can't honestly answer that question because of the judgment that then comes, which we then miss an important opportunity as healthcare workers and providers to give relevant information, to provide safer sex tools, and ultimately to assist sex workers with the issues of consent and navigating for themselves relationships in a safer way, especially in a country, of course, that's just dealing with high rates of gender-based violence generally. And sex work precisely puts women at a higher risk because many are Black and they're working outdoors.
Would we, for instance, if we decrim sex work, see special clinics for sex workers? I know we have some research sites, but open, for instance, like in the Netherlands.
So stigmatization, of course, is a big issue. And regardless of the legal framework, we know that there is work that continually has to happen around stigmatization. What's then needed is to have a look at the public health policy right now and decide, do we have enough, for example, specialized sexual and reproductive health clinics in general that the general public needs? And therefore, when we then go into the specialized needs for adolescents, sex workers, men having sex with men, those are key populations at risk. And do we then need a standalone one for sex workers, or do we incorporate them in a more comprehensive way within the existing public health service? And those are questions that will come. And I think the imagination and the creativity will often get unlocked once we are no longer operating within a criminalized state of mind.
Deputy Minister, Dr. T has now alluded a little bit to implementation. So how will sex work legally be regulated if it becomes legal?
So basically with that, it being removed as a crime from the statute books, then the other laws, regulations will apply. Labor laws, if people are working in a brothel. Municipal bylaws when it comes to the location of brothels or people selling sex on the street. Those existing laws would apply. The second step is going to be the issue of regulation. That's a far more complicated issue because from government's point of view, it involves three spheres of government: local, provincial, national. We've got to look at what is best and most practical for South Africa.
Will all districts, when it comes to regulation, have the same rules, or will they be able to make their own rules?
No. The issue of zoning is a municipal function, so currently it would be up to each municipality as to determine, they would have laws in place already. So we do need to look at the issue of a broader framework, but that unfortunately will only come later.
And what kind of laws do they already have in place that you refer to?
Well, there would be municipal bylaws. So there would be municipal bylaws relating to zoning of businesses and where you can conduct businesses, for example. There would be issues of bylaws relating to soliciting on the street. Which is where, unfortunately, a lot of the sex workers have problems with law enforcement officers. So those would be all municipal bylaws specific to that place, and they may differ from place to place.
Dr. T, as a health advocate, what sort of implementation rules would you like to see?
Within the health sector, I think there needs to be more training in terms of human rights from an undergraduate level. We need to have healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, and the whole allied, healthcare professional understanding the particular needs of sex workers. When you're thinking about the development of the condom, a lot of sex workers still have to use a condom that they have to negotiate with a male client, for example. So we need more tools that sex workers themselves, especially those who are women, can negotiate, but can also use themselves without having, the added burden of making sure that their client also, buys into that method. We need to have, for example, pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV, freely available everywhere, anywhere where people can get it. And I think the issue of healthcare education is still very important because that will eradicate a lot of stigma.
Deputy Minister, will sex workers pay tax, and how will that work?
The effect of the decriminalising is that people can do what they want to do, make money the way they want to make it, because it's not a crime. So if you want to grow vegetables and sell those vegetables and make an income from that, or you want to give massages to people, or you want to sell sex. So yes, my understanding would be that if they're earning over, the laws would apply. If they're earning over a particular threshold, they would be liable to pay tax. Obviously, sex work would still be part of the informal economy, so SARS will have to look at how they, and probably have engagements with sex work organizations as to how they're going to look at ensuring that people who are meant to pay tax pay tax.
And if a sex worker feels they've been treated unfairly in a work environment, will they be able to go to the CCMA, and would the CCMA workers need to be retrained?
Look, already I think there's been one CCMA or labour court case involving a sex worker who wasn't paid by her client, where it was enforced that the client had to pay even though it wasn't legal, but still had to pay. In terms of working for a larger group like a brothel, then the Labour Relations Act would apply.
Deputy Minister Jeffery, Dr. T, thanks very much for making the time to talk to us today. Well, that was our program for February. Until March, goodbye.